Hello everyone, Leo here, Chilean physician and science fiction author, and in this video I want to show you something really cool that I found, which is the footage of something really cool, I think, at least in terms of historical value. And it is the first participation of Chile in the American Science Fiction Convention of Washington, D.C., which is Capclave, which is held by the Washington Science Fiction Association, there, WSFA, for the acronym WSFA. And so I found the footage. That's the thing. I found some parts of it, at least. This was 5 years ago. And so I have the fragments, some fragments of the video, and I'm gonna put them together as good as I can. But I think it's gonna be good enough, at least, again, as historical value. But so let me tell you just a little bit the short story about it. Well, there is some information on my website. I'm gonna put you the link in the description or something where you can go visit my website, and there is the whole story of this adventure. But short story, it's that when I lived in the United States, last time I lived there was in 2015, and while I was there, I became a member of the Washington Science Fiction Association, which was really cool. I had a great time with them. Hope to see them again soon, I guess. Haven't seen them since 2015. And so with them, we did a lot of things, met really cool people. And one of the things that we got to do was to do this official presentation for Chile at Capclave. So after working with a lot of people, that part of the story is in the website, that would be too long to explain, but we worked together as a really nice team, and we get to do this presentation. So at Capclave 2015 there was an official presentation dedicated to Chilean science fiction, and I only had partial footage, I guess, because at that time I didn't have a good enough cell phone to record it. I was not thinking about it for the future, maybe. So all that there was the written articles that I've written, and that you can read them, most of them in Spanish, but I got the English one for my website. But now there is footage, so that's the thing. Now keep in mind that this is 5 years ago. I haven't gone through all the footage myself, so I'm not sure if everything I said back then was as accurate in terms of Chilean science fiction stuff today. I would imagine I did not make terrible mistakes, but as I said, well, I have learned about Chilean science fiction a lot this 5 years. So let's see how it was. But anyway, I still think it has a lot of historical value. Once again, at least as a memory of something cool to watch, to remember and all that. It was a really great time. Again, I had a great time when I was there in 2015 with WSFA and all that. I really loved that place, and everything they did together was a really great time. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. It's gonna be a little bit long because it's not the whole presentation, but there's a big parts of it. But you know, it's gonna be around, so you can check it out whenever you feel like looking at it or something. Let me show you something. This is like something I always keep. I'm not gonna. Okay, let me change the angle of the camera, but I'm gonna show you something really cool. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you. It's a really nice thing that I keep around me. I always, when I look at it, it sparks joy, because that was a great year. I had a lot of fun. So this reminds me of that all the time. And right here I have this is what we had for the 2019 with the Chilean Science Fiction Association. Great time too. We haven't gotten one from 2020. Well, 2020 was a special year, so I think it was mostly virtual, so we don't need something physical. But yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. And another stuff that was really cool is that at that time, at that Capclave, I got this, which is something really nice. This is Welcome to the Greenhouse, a new science fiction on climate change. And the nice thing is that this was given to me by Gordon Van Gelder himself. I don't have a video as a proof, but I can promise you it was given to me by him. Really great guy. Have great memories about that moment. And also at that time I got a lot of copies of the, well, not a lot, I got 4, but that's a lot for me. I got this fantasy and science fiction magazine, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. So I got some copies of this too, and these are great memories as well, you know, because before I had been in the United States, I had never seen one of this, so it's a cool thing to have around. So that's it, I want to show you this too. Some things I keep to remind myself of that time. Okay, so that's the short story behind this footage. I will invite you to read the more of this in the article that I told you that I wrote. I could be speaking about it because I really like to, but I think it's written there really cool. I'm gonna again put you the link, the website, so you can read it, see some more pictures and all. But it's such a great memory. So I'm gonna have some fun putting on the footage to put the pieces together. I know there is not a full version, because this footage I got it from my mom and dad's phone. I just was looking at the things there and I found it. So I have some pieces that I think is gonna be good enough, at least to have a quick view of how it was. I had a shorter hair at that time, so I look more professional, perhaps. I was a lot skinnier too, but well, you know, it's 5 years. I was not a doctor yet at that time. Now I'm a doctor, so I got that going on. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed. See you around.
Us about Chilean science fiction, which is what we'll be discussing today. So before I begin, just a brief introduction about the people that's going to be involved in this presentation. How it's going to work, it's for the first 25-30 minutes I'll be telling you the history of Chilean science fiction. My name is Leonardo Espinosa Benavides. I am from Chile. I've got a bachelor's degree in medicine. I try to promote Chilean science fiction as much as I can. And I'm also just starting as a science fiction writer myself. And after I tell you the history, we'll have a contact with our Chilean friend. He's in Santiago right now. And he has studied history, and he's doing something that has never done before, which he's about to publish the most complete document about the history of Chilean science fiction. So he should be able to answer all of our questions. He's probably the one that knows the most about the history of Chilean science fiction right now. So he'll be a great support right now. Just some special thanks to people that contributed here, that we almost got to participate, just for different reasons they couldn't be here. Rodrigo Yuri, he's a writer. Luis Saavedra, he's a promoter of the genre in Chile as well. And Marcelo Novoa, he's an editor. So, to start about talking about this, I thought you should know Chile first. So, just a few words about the country. I wanted to show you certain things so you can have a mental image of how's the situation there, how we're doing. And first of all, this is Chile, the one in red, that long, thin country in South America. We have certain islands. That's Easter Island, actually. I guess you may have heard of that. It's like a little Hawaii there. So certain information about the country that I thought might be useful for you to get an idea. First, I brought 2 indexes, just for straight objective data. And for example, in the Index of Economic Freedom as of 2015, we're number 7. We're doing good. And in the Human Development Index as of 2014, we're in the very high category. So that's also really good for us. And certain things that are quite characteristic of Chile. First of all, our earthquakes. Yes, you may have heard about that too. We get those like every month. It just happens all the time. Actually, the strongest earthquake ever measured happened in Chile. Since we have measuring devices, is in 1960. It was 9.5 in the Richter scale. That was really bad. Destroyed the whole city. And then it came the tsunami. And we actually got one like a month ago. It was 8.2, but by now the country is very prepared, so it was okay for us now. Another thing that's quite characteristic about Chile is our wine. Great.
Wine.
You know the wine? Yeah, so it's really good. I've seen a lot of Chilean wine here in the US, so that's good for us as well. And in terms of literature, which is what we'll be mostly discussing today, poetry is probably the most important branch of literature in Chile. It's our most strong thing. We have Pablo Neruda, Nobel Prize. He's been translated to probably all of the languages in the world. So poetry plays a key element when it comes to the influences to Chilean writers, and that also affects science fiction. So it's an important element. And this, I think it's a very interesting thing to keep in mind during the presentation as I'll tell you the situation. It's a study that the UNESCO made in 2012, and what they found out is that in Chile, out of all the readers, only 7% of them read because they like it. Only 7%. Here, for example, in the US, what I've seen since the time I've been here is that people read a lot in the US, just for fun. This is what I've seen, at least.
That's because you're coming to Westlaw.
Well, yeah, probably. But we are not doing good at all in terms of that. In this research, what showed was that most of the people would read because of their jobs, because of academic reasons. It's also interesting to see that in this study, out of the countries in the study, that was Latin America, we were the second country that would read the most, actually, in absolute numbers. But we were one of the ones that would read the least, just for entertainment or for personal reasons. So having all of those things in mind, I think that's a good picture of Chile. So we can get into science fiction in Chile. 1984, great novel. This was a very important year for science fiction in Chile because Remy Moore, he is a French man. He published one of the earliest and one of the few documents of the history of Chilean science fiction. And he was actually he was a very hard critic of how science fiction was developing in the country. And I want to quote a contemporary scholar from Chile, Omar Vega. He said about this document, he said, Remy Moore, research pioneer of the genre in Chile, was able to affirm with impunity that Chilean science fiction was born in 1959 and died in the mid-70s. So that's really not good. He said that basically we had science fiction for 11 years, that's it. So what I want to show you is that there is some truth in that statement, but I'll show you why it's not enough to really talk about Chilean science fiction. It's wider. So let's go to the true origins of this in this faraway country. Oh, sorry. 1877. This is what we consider to be the first Chilean science fiction novel ever documented. There were some documents before that year, just a couple years before, but they were short documents that could be classified as science fiction, but this is what we consider to be the beginning of the genre in the country. This is a book published by Francisco Miralles. He was a man he was born in Santa Cruz. There's a place in Chile, this is California. It's 2 hours southern to Santiago, the capital, but he ended up in Santiago, and that's something that has happened in Chile since Chile is Chile. It's a very centralized country. Santiago has a third of the population, so people end up in Santiago since these times. And something that's very particular about him is that he chose to publish this novel under a pseudonym in English, St. Paul. I don't know the exact reason why he chose a pseudonym in English, the novel is in Spanish, but it shows that there was already a clear influence from North America, from Europe, that was influencing our literature from that time. He was an engineer, he was also a painter, a photographer, and a writer. And about the novel itself, so you can see what was going on, how it all began. The novel deals with a man from Santiago. He goes through this process called magnetization, which is it's just a hypnosis made by a friend of him. And what happens is that he finds himself in Jupiter, He gets to be there. But once he is in Jupiter, things become more science fiction. So the novel then it shows clear elements of the genre. It deals with technological advances, speculates about telescopes. This civilization is looking at Earth from Jupiter at that time. It deals with optics, and it shows the architecture of this Jovian, Jupiterian civilization there. So it has those common elements that would then develop in the genre itself. And also another thing that I think it's important to mention about this novel is that it already had mixed elements in it. It's not pure science fiction. It has a lot of, it's written with a lot of philosophical terms when it comes to analyze the society, because in this world in Jupiter, they talk about levels of how visible matter is. And for example, we humans, the protagonist, is the most material being, in contrast with what would be the most unmaterial beings, the most spirituals. And this society is kind of in between. And they know that they're in between, and they deal with a situation in which they really want to gather knowledge because they think it's really important as a species, but they also know how important it is to not do that and spend just some time with their loved ones. I think that's a really interesting analysis of society back then, how they were dealing with these things of knowledge and just spending some time. So that was the beginning. Then this novel got republished, second edition in 1886. And it was expanded, then it contained more political elements. He then analyzed more of the Chilean of that time, the Chile of that time. One last thing about this novel, this is a free access novel. There is a project by the National Library of Chile. It's called Chilean Memory, and they've been rescuing science fiction books and published them for free on the website. So just in case you ever feel like reading something in old grammar Spanish, you can get it for free. So it was a good start. Chilean science fiction was born. And then what happened? Why didn't Remy Moore say that this was the beginning? But because what happened was that they have to go more than 50 years for another science fiction book to come out. It was only one that just disappeared. And then we get into what we call the early period, which is in between until 1959, which was the important year that Remy Moore said. So in this early period, there are two key elements for understanding this. First of all, science fiction was not published continuously. This was only sporadically appearing books. There was only about 30 books in total from the 19th century to 1959, only 30. And also there were no dedicated authors to science fiction. These were just writers who would happen to write a book that then, in retrospective, would be classified as science fiction. So I brought some examples for you to know also what was going on. For example, this one, The Master of the Stars, is like a typical short story collection. For example, there is one of the story in which there is an astronomical object coming close to Earth, and it's somehow affecting the vitamin D in humans, and it's affecting the bone growth in humans. So it's like classic science fiction. And then I brought this other example. This one's called Ovalle, that's a city in Chile. April 21st, 2031 by Dr. David Perry. This was like a classic utopia, so we started doing that as well. It was a rural city in Chile that was explored how could it be 100 years in the future. Then we go in the years and we get The Snail and the Goddess. This was already after the wars. So this was actually about a mother who is trying to save her son from the Third World War. And what they come up with is that he's going to hide until the war is over. So he hides, and what happens is he goes into this kind of astral projection, astral traveling. Once again, a Chilean finding himself somewhere else because of these things. And he goes into the future, 20 centuries in the future, and then the novel develops. And lastly, this I think is a really good example. It's an interesting example. It's called An Angel for Chile from 1959. And this story is about a Chile in the year 2015, so it will be right now, but it didn't happen, but what I'm going to tell you. It said that in Chile somehow a clown, just a citizen who happened to be a clown for his job, he discovers the official cure for baldness, the complete cure. So Chile becomes a super rich country because everybody goes to Chile to buy this cure, and Chile becomes a great, great nation. Of course, it got a lot of satirical elements, the novel at that time, and it didn't happen. I told you that we don't have the cure for baldness in Chile. So this is what happened in the early period, sporadically appearing books. And then everything changed in 1959, what Remy Moore would say, the true beginning. This man happened. He's Hugo Correa. He is undoubtedly, undisputable, our most important writer. And he wrote in 1959 the novel that would change things and that would make Chilean science fiction somehow important, at least in Latin America. But before I tell you about his novel, I want to tell you why is Ray Bradbury here. Well, Mr. Bradbury was actually very important for Chilean science fiction. We owe him a lot. What happened was that Hugo Correa, he wrote his novel, and then nothing big happened, but he managed to get a grant to come to the United States, and he went to the Iowa's Writers Workshop. So he went there, he one of the few and first Chileans to do that. And before he went back to Chile, he said, well, he thought it was a good idea just to translate some of his stories and send them to Ray Bradbury. They never met before. He had read his work, but they have never met. So he just sent them just in case. And then before he go back to Chile, he also went to California just to spend some summer time. And actually, Ray Bradbury got really interested in his short stories. So Ray went to visit Hugo Correa and his wife. So they met each other, they had some good time, and the result of all of this was that Ray Bradbury sent plenty of Hugo Correa's short stories to different editors with a letter of introduction. So that was really good, and he became one of the first, if not the first, Latin American science fiction writer to be published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction in 1962 with a short story called The Last Element, and then again in 1967 with Alter Ego. This was thanks to Ray Bradbury, and of course because he was writing good science fiction. So that launched his career. He got motivated, he got this huge incentive, so he kept on writing, and that's what led us to this almost golden era. I'll tell you why it's almost. So just a few things, just in case. He has been said this about him. Hugo Correa is the man widely credited with launching modern science fiction in Latin America, so he was important. This was said by Andrea Bell. She is an American professor. She lives in Minnesota. She's a professor of Spanish and Latin American studies, and she was an exchange student in Chile. And there she got really interested with science fiction from Chile and Latin America, and we owe her a lot too. She has rescued so many science fiction from Latin America, and she has republished them, which otherwise would have just been lost. But why is he almost in this golden era? Because of this in part. This is another quote. This author, Hugo Correa, carries out a silent and notable labor adding science fiction novels and stories for 40 years, and here's the key, worthy of international praise and local disdain. Well, this was said by Marcelo Novoa. He's a really important Chilean science fiction scholar, editor, promoter of the genre. He works continuously for all of this. But this is the key. He just never got recognized in Chile at all. He got translated to Italian, to Swedish, to several countries in Europe, and he got praised by Ray Bradbury. That's enough. But he was not recognized in Chile at all. People just didn't care about science fiction at that time. But he was motivated enough to just keep reading, to keep writing, so he kept doing that. And now I'll go to a little bit to this important novel that he wrote in 1959. This is The Superior Ones. The original name is Los Altísimos, and if you want to have a more purist translation, that's more like The Highest Ones, but it contains the same meaning. So, without giving you so many spoilers, because if you ever get to choose something from Chilean science fiction, should be this one to start. This is like the classic. This is about a Chilean who finds himself somehow in this artificial hollow planet that consists of several inner rings, and these rings have more rings in them orbiting. So it's about this Chilean finding himself there, discovering this society that's living there, and the problems that these societies are facing, and you get to go through the entire novel trying to figure out who are these superior ones, which are somehow other beings that are conflicting with this society. So what's also important about this novel, what has been written by other scholars, is that at that time, this was written before the masterpieces of Larry Niven, Ring World, and Rendezvous with Rama. of Arthur C. Clarke. So he was already talking about these topics that would be later developed more in the US or in Europe. So he was setting all these precedents. And well, also for this almost golden era, you can't just have one author, of course. So these are our big three. This is like, of course, an analogy to your big three. These are the people who made this almost golden age. The almost still is because there was no recognition until way later. So we have Hugo Correa, the one that I told you about, Elena Aldunate, and Antonio Montero. I'm gonna say a few words about Antonio Montero. He was an engineer. He wrote 3 books of science fiction, which was enough for Remy Moore to consider him a proper science fiction writer. But what happened was that he didn't have a Ray Bradbury for himself, so he was just not recognized at all. He tried to start a magazine in Chile, one of the first. It was called Time Space, and he got 2 volumes and then just got canceled. No one bought it. So in his case, in the 70s, he just said, no, I'm just not gonna do this. So he stopped writing science fiction. He kept writing other things. And our third exponent that's very important is Elena Aldunate. She was actually very important to the genre. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the female authors at this time. As I said, she is Elena Aldunate. She was very loved and respected in the circle of science fiction because she was very involved with the authors at that time. She was a very important promoter of the genre. She was a journalist, the daughter of a science writer, and she wrote continuously several works in science fiction. But what's important about her and to understand also about the genre in Chile is that she was not really that much concerned with science or technology. She was more concerned with emotions. She was more of a poet. Once again, poetry being in Chile all the time. So, for example, her most famous short story is one that's called Juana and the Cybernetics. And for you to get an idea what she wrote, this is a story about a poor worker woman. She works in a factory, and she somehow, because of an accident, she gets trapped in this factory for 3 days because it's gonna be New Year and she knows no one's gonna be able to come to her until it's Monday, and this is a Friday. So she gets trapped, and she goes into this existential crisis in this factory when she realizes how lonely she is. She's a 40-year-old woman, and she realizes that the only companies are these machines in this factory. But you don't get to know if this is in the future or not. Robots are mentioned, but you don't really know what things are being built in this factory because it's not important for the author. So overall, what happens in the end is a quite disturbing, central erotic situation of the protagonist on some of this machine, kind of a deadly situation. So you see, science fiction was going through this kind of analysis. It was not that much of science as you would have in other countries. And a few words about this is another woman that she is not usually recognized, so I wanted to show her. She doesn't even have a picture in the internet. She is Hilda Cadiz Avila, and she wrote this book. It's a short story collection. She only wrote 2, so she didn't have the 3 that Remy Moore would ask to be considered a science fiction author. But she actually wrote quite a typical science fiction that would be considered to be complete science fiction. And some of her stories I think are quite interesting. One in particular that stuck with me was one called Mystery in Space, just a simple name, but it was about 2 Chilean women who got selected to go into this orbital mission in an orbital station. They were the most capable, so they got chosen because of their abilities, these 2 women. And what happens is that somehow they got to be there alone for way longer than they thought they were going to be. So when 2 people are alone for too long, things could get difficult. And the fun part is that there is an accident nearby and they have to rescue an astronaut. And what happens is that this astronaut is a very, very handsome blonde Soviet astronaut. So the story is about what happens with this woman and this situation that they're facing. So it's a very interesting short story. So that's about this almost golden era that we had science fiction published continuously, certain authors. But then, as Remy Moore said, in the 70s, something happened. I'm not sure how many of you know what happened in Chile in the 70s. Things got kind of dark. So we got into the dictatorship, 1973. So it's still a very dividing topic in the country. So we just say it changed the country forever. It just changed it. But nevertheless, well, a lot of authors went to the exile, and science fiction once again became just something not published continuously. It came mostly to a halt. The big three, they just stopped writing. They would write at least one book like in a decade, but some of them weren't even science fiction. So we came into this situation again. But there were some examples worthy of mentioning, because now there is a clear political situation, so it's going to influence what's being written. For example, I think this is very interesting. This is a book from 1982, The Last Song of Miguel Sendero by Ariel Dorfman. This is about a place in a dictatorship, and the rebel leader is a fetus who refuses to be born. So you got this idea. And another example is the Mancini Report, 1983 by Francisco Simón Rivas. This is a novel in which Pinochet, the dictator in Chile, he found a way to clone himself to rule forever. So that was what's going on in Chile. And this is another example I wanted to bring. This was when the dictatorship was already over, though, just in the beginning of the 90s. But this story still had certain elements of that time. It's about a robot. It's a cyborg, but it's more of a robot, flowers for a cyborg. And this robot just kills generals that were involved in human rights violations. It's just plain like that. But what's important about this is that this actually got 2 sequels, and it became the first ever saga of science fiction in Chile, so it got its merits. But besides this situation involving the dictatorship, some things were happening. And it's about this, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but fanzines. So in this time, people that were in the almost golden age, they kept on trying to keep the genre alive, trying to gather together, and by the years, in the 80s, new people would join them. So they had a club, for example, that evolved to something with a different name, but they tried to stay together. Although they were not producing that much science fiction, they were having a fandom, fanzines, they tried to keep it alive. And actually in these years is when Remy Moore published his essay in 1984. So they were doing that. They wanted to bring the genre, again, the history, for people to know about it. And they did a lot of work in this. All of the fanzines that were created, none of them got to continuously got printed, they all stopped. But it set a precedence, and a lot of people got to publish things, short stories or something that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So in the end, what happens is the work of all of these people working like in an underground zine, it all worked out to happen well in the 21st century. And this is our current situation. We're actually having a good time now. This is something I call the revival. This is because, once again, science fiction is being published continuously. This hadn't happened in a long time. And the key element here is that, well, independent editorials came into play. We hadn't those before. I think this is Small Press for you, that's the name. This opened so many doors. This hadn't been done before, and big editorials in Chile still, they just will not publish science fiction. They just wouldn't. We have certain exceptions, a few authors that have been published by the big houses, but that doesn't happen. So this changed everything. And at the same time, it brought an increasing number of authors. For example, this is a book from one of the independent editorials, the oldest one. It's called Puerto de Escape, Skateboard. And there were also a lot of collaborations right now. For example, this one, Poliedro. This is a collaboration of authors, science fiction, fantasy, and horror authors. They gather together, they put some short stories, and they publish an anthology every 2 years. They're in their number 5. Most of this history is a retrospective study. And the big 3, most of them were alive at the beginning of the century. None of them are now. But for example, Antonio Montero, the one I told you that he just stopped writing because no one cared about him, he actually got... I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. we get in contact with our Chilean friend, does anybody have a comments, some questions?
You spoke a lot about Chilean science fiction. What about English language translations? Was that a factor at all? Were there many? Were there none?
Yes, well,
You may have to repeat so que se can hear a little bit about.
okay, I'll say the question in Spanish for our friend
Sure,
here.
sure. I just wanted to know.
José, nos están preguntando por las obras en inglés que estuvieron en Chile, así que les voy a responder un poquito. Well, I think people in Chile read way more in science fiction in English. I mean, it's translated to Spanish. Spanish is it's a big language, so things get translated to Spanish quite fast. Actually, the books right now, if they do well here in the US, in a couple of months, they're all written in Spanish. And throughout this time, it was a very important influence. I mean, all of these big three that I've told you, they would all say that their influences were Asimov, Clarke. Hugo Correa he read a lot of Clifford T. Simak, Ray Bradbury. So it was a big thing during our almost golden time. And we have been having this translation continuously. And right now, I would say just a regular Chilean, we know way more about American science fiction than Chilean science fiction. I mean, Hugo Correa, our legend, he is not really known in Chile. I mean, we know him because we're in this circle. We in Chile, but he's not like famous at all. People would know Asimov before Correa, so that's what happened. Somebody else has some questions?
To what extent is Chilean science fiction published elsewhere in the Spanish language world?
Okay, so our main place, like our goal place to publish is Spain. Spain is like the place where science fiction in Spanish is like our goal. But once again, we even though we're working on this, we still don't have that much science fiction to send somewhere else. Actually, one very interesting thing, since 2000, from 2000 to 2015, if you count all the science fiction that has been ever published in Chile, 2/3 of all of it was published these last 15 years, 2/3 of it. So we're just starting with this. It's a whole new thing. Authors would usually publish in different Spanish websites, but it's for free. Just send your stories and they see if they publish you. There are several sites from Spain and Argentina. Argentina has a strong science fiction as well. And that's like the current situation right now. We have like 2 successful authors, so you can say they are successful, and they got to go with big editorials from Spain. But these are exceptions, and they are not the science fiction like you would be used to. These are more, they mix more magical realism, a really South American thing, so that gets more interesting for big houses. So that's the situation right now.
I know that Chile is becoming a hub of astronomy, especially up in the north in the Atacama Desert. There are a lot of telescopes. It's a great place to do stargazing. Do you think that influence of people coming to study astronomy and do astronomy in Chile is having a good impact on science fiction there?
I wish it was more of an impact. I think it doesn't affect it as much as it should, because it's true. Chile has like the best observatories in the world. I mean, of course they are paid by American governments or other places, but they are there at least, and we Chileans have places for astronomers to go there. And even still, astronomy is not a really popular career in Chile, which is it just happens. I'm not sure why. But so to answer that, no, it hasn't influenced that much as it should. Astronomy is just a strange career there, even though we have all these facilities. But I hope that it might eventually promote more of the genre. Well, so we will be discussing one more things. Now, we're going to do a brief commentary from our Chilean contact. Once again, he specializes in history of Chilean science fiction. He is a historian, and he speaks Spanish. So we're gonna keep this not that long, so you don't get confused with all the translation I have to do. He's gonna tell us something just in 10 to 15 minutes, that's it. But what he's going to tell us is, because I told you all the history of science fiction itself, but The situation right now in Chile is that we get really confused when we come to do a category for science fiction. We talk about fantastic literature. I'm not sure if you use the same term in English for fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Well, in Chile, our borders between genres are more diffuse. Because science fiction, as it is not popular or well-known, sometimes you can find in a review or a newspaper a book that's clearly fantasy or an epic fantasy, and the reviewer would say this is a science fiction novel. So there is still a lot of confusion in Chile about that. That's because we haven't done that much. So, Jose, he's gonna talk a little bit about that, about how is the situation right now in terms of the fantastic literature and how science fiction is in all of this. So once again, if you have some troubles with the language barrier, just stop me and I can repeat, or I'll try to do my best in this part. Okay? Jose?
Hola.
Can it be louder? Jose?
Hola, hola. ¿Ahora sí?
Ahora sí. Ya les di toda la introducción, puedes tú partir.
Hola, agradezco a todos por su presencia en el lugar. Es un tremendo privilegio participar en este evento.
Hello everyone, I feel very privileged to be here and thank you for being here.
Quiero felicitar a Leonardo por la extraordinaria presentación, fue muy completa, a pesar de lo que entendí, fue muy entretenida, muy amena y muy completa, muy buena investigación.
He liked the presentation. He's congratulating me.
Bueno, primero voy a comenzar contextualizando lo que sucedió en los últimos años.
So the first thing I'm going to do is to put in context what's been going on the last 10 years.
Ya. Para ubicar así a la literatura de ciencia ficción dentro de esta historia.
To put science fiction in this fantastic genre.
La literatura fantástica en la última década ha tenido por característica lo que conocemos como un efecto espejo.
The fantastic literature in Chile this last decades has had an effect that we call a mirror effect.
Este efecto consiste en que se escribe en Chile en base a imitación a temáticas, sobre todo las expuestas en el cine.
So this translates that right now in Chile, what people are writing in terms of fantastic literatures are imitations, reflections of what Chileans see in the movies, rather than what they read.
Por eso, a partir de la primera década del segundo milenio, nos encontramos con obras que consisten en vampiros, hombres lobos o aventuras épicas.
Because of this, you would find a lot in the 2000s, you would find a lot of stories about vampires and werewolves and epic fantasy.
La ciencia ficción pasó a un segundo plano, dejando de estar en el foco, heredado a partir, como dijimos, del cine, sobre todo de Matrix.
So Chilean science fiction got to a lower level in terms of what was being written, which was the opposite in the 90s, where thanks to movies like Matrix, for example, there was also this mirror effect, but it was good for science fiction. But in the 2000s, we came back to fantasy.
Porque es necesario decir que la literatura en Chile no se caracteriza por escuelas o agrupaciones, sino que en realidad el cine es el mayor creador de comunidades.
So in Chile we don't have associations or communities like the one here, we just don't. And what moves literary fantastic genre in Chile is, as I've been telling you, mostly the movies, not literature itself.
Sin embargo, durante esta década aparecieron dos núcleos de difusión. Uno de estos es la editorial Puerto de Escape.
Nevertheless, in these years, there were some groups dedicated exclusively to science fiction. These were two groups that were working separately, and one of them was the one that was with the independent editorial Puerto de Escape, Skateboard.
El otro núcleo de difusión es el conjunto de cuentistas que tiene por factor común que sean mayores de 40 o 50 años.
And the other group is a group of writers. They are all short story writers, and what they have in common is that all of them are older than 40 years old. They're all 40 to 50-year-old people, not young people.
Esto es por eso mismo, es que la ciencia ficción chilena se caracteriza por ser de adultos, por ser escrita por adultos.
So we basically do not have at all a science fiction market in terms of young adult. This is only adults writing science fiction, and they face the challenge of doing so. But I would personally recommend you to start with other ones. But if you type in Google Hugo Correa or Andrea Vela and Chilean science fiction, you might find something in English. But as I said before, the best thing would be to go to the superior ones, the one from Hugo Correa. And I know that at a certain point it got translated to English, so it has to exist somewhere. But it's not easy. I'm gonna ask him just in case if he knows more. José, ¿sabes tú cómo pueden ellos acceder a ciencia ficción chilena en inglés? ¿Los clásicos o alguna cosa por el estilo?
Solamente por medio de la universidad en la que estuvo Hugo Correa.
¿Ya?
Y en el caso de la Universidad de South Florida, hay una revista que se llama Alambique, una revista universitaria.
He said that you would probably have to go to where Hugo Correa, the college he went in the US, to find something from him. Probably in Iowa, and he said in South Florida there is a magazine that seems
largely overlooked.
Yes, I would agree. Actually, saying about that, the books that I've read about science fiction right now, there was one that I showed you in the presentation. I know that writer, and he actually wrote of what you said. He used the social sciences to develop a novel, and it's actually really good. He's a lawyer. Oh, it's right there. I can write the name to you. It's in Spanish. It's Los Vástagos de la Mente. I'm not sure how to translate that. It's a strange word even in Spanish.
Repeat slower, please.
I can show you the name later on if you want, but I can spell it.
Lovely.
I'll show it to you later on.
Thank you.
Well, about that book, that is a book. It's a book published 1 year ago. I went to the presentation of that book. It's the first book of this writer. He just started, although he took a lot of years to write this. I'm not sure it's going to be easy to find it because it was from these independent editorials. We worked really hard to actually get the book into the stores. The book is there, so that's good for us in Chile at least. But it's a good example of social sciences in between. But if you want later on, I can, well, once again, all of you, I can, if you want a list of something to read or something like that, just contact me, I'll be around, I'll be here, I just can tell you a lot of names that you can keep in mind to find. That would be easier for you to find.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm not sure I'd agree with your assessment of the state of Chilean development and science. I mean,
Oh yeah,
my
this
experience-
is just a hypothesis.
Yeah, well, I mean, my experience, the Chilean
uh-huh.
science is actually pretty good and becoming a lot more international as we go on. I mean, there are certainly world-known scientists in Chile, but if you actually look at the connection between science fiction and science in the history of the U.S., it's not that tight. But the reason it's now, very popular in the U.S. and goes way beyond the core science fiction fandom isn't literature. It's the success of movies and comics,
True.
right? I mean, and so to what extent is the general population in Chile, that kind of popular, pop culture in Chile, and you think that that's something which might expand people's interests?
Yes. Well, actually, I do agree with you. I just wanted to tell me your things. But I think, like you, I believe Chile has all the things. I mean, we're doing really good if we're considering the very high human development index, which